Good Sunday night. I am Tabo. Really good to be back with you for the first time this year on In Focus. And of course, conversations continue here on Newzroom Afrika, channel 405. There have been many questions and conjecture around how the Zondo Commission report can be implemented, from recommendations to prosecutions. All the questions point to the National Prosecuting Authority and its ability to pursue meaningful justice. We probe that question a little bit further. We have analysts with us: Tessa Dooms, Rebone Tau, and Ntsikelelo breakfast, as well as Sandile, Swane. And you're a part of this conversation. As always, let us in on your views tonight. That WhatsApp number, 072-110-5584, or you tweet us tonight at Newzroom405. Good evening to you all, and thank you very much for your time joining us tonight on In Focus and to deliberate on this matter. Of course, the latest is that very interesting recommendation and interesting reflection. He says he's old enough, so because he's old, he can make this recommendation. That is the ANC chairperson. He says, after spending so much money in this commission, trying to get to the bottom of what happened in state capture, he says the report should never be used as an axe for the ANC to go after one another, but used to review the ANC's mistakes and rebuild the organization. I mean, if we begin right there, you do get a sense from that particular statement and that recommendation that there is any degree of political will to actually implement these recommendations and allow the state to prosecute as they should and do what the state is able to do. Dr. Breakfast.
Yeah, so first of all, I think we need to separate two things. We need to separate the state from the ANC. The name of the document is state capture, not ANC capture. So in my opinion, that means that it's the state that needs to act. The ANC also can act by itself. So at the level of the state, the law needs to take its course. But because also the ANC was under the spotlight, it can also act by itself. So I think the two processes, we need to separate them. Otherwise, we'll be clouding issues. Now, with regard to the assertion by the chairperson of the ANC, I'm very much critical of that argument, because it strikes me as an argument that seeks to exempt some people from wrongdoing. And also it gives me the impression that some of the findings must be taken lightly. It gives me the impression that he was implying that there must be a political solution to the problems that are faced by the ANC. The ANC can have its own process of dealing with its own challenges. They can have workshop problem-solving meetings where they try to iron out their own issues. That is all well and good. But the processes that need to unfold at the level of the state, they should not be tampered with.
Yeah. You don't think, though, that the organization is hopelessly conflicted here as far as state and party is concerned? Because, I mean, some of the people that would need to implement these recommendations could also be implicated in this, and they are currently holding positions in that very same state in organizational institutions that should be implementing those recommendations.
Of course, Tabo, I do acknowledge that point. You are making a very good point. But the state is a different organ. You know, it symbolizes power, which is outside the ANC, and the state is meant to serve everyone. So because the state was affected by institutionalization of corruption, it is the one that needs to act. For instance, one of the things that the so-called state capture project did was the erosion of the security architecture. And also the past is still with us, because we saw what had happened last year in June. The failure of the state to intercept information about those operations of the outbreak of violence. because some of the factional battles of the ANC have had a spillover effect to the state. And also, one of the examples that I can make is the slow pace of the NPA in terms of doing prosecutions and arrests as well.
Yeah. Tessa Dooms, let's bring you in here. A liberation movement, by and large, if you look at this report, painted as an instrument of corruption. When you then look at the statement of the chairperson of the organization in that background, is in fact, firstly, how do you respond to that particular statement? But is the organization going to have a difficulty in being able to separate itself as an organization from individuals who are implicated in this report?
Tabo, I think one of the statements that's been made by Rebone Tau as chairperson, we heard the president actually make this statement yesterday as well, and I've seen several top ANC leaders make the statement that it is not the ANC that is painted as corrupt through the state capture report, but individuals in the ANC. I think Rebone Tau went as far as saying it is ministers in government that made those errors and made those judgments rather than ministers of the ANC. And I think that points to two things. One, that the ANC as a political unit, a political movement and a governing party does not seem to have a plan for the way that they're going to approach this commission report. They don't seem to have, even if we can scoff at the idea of a political solution, but there certainly could be a political process that they follow internally to try and work through the recommendations of this report in the ways that it, one, affects their members, but two, also implicates them as a party and the kinds of processes that they followed as a party that allowed these things to happen under their watch. There does not seem to be a will within the ANC for them to take ownership as a political organization, as a governing party, and as a party and members in that party who had the ability, the political responsibility and the power as deployees in the state to actually stop certain things, to have the checks and balances in place, to make different decisions, to take themselves out of compromising situations or to hold each other accountable. Without that in the ANC, without that sensibility that they're actually going to take seriously what they are able to do on their side, we have very little hope that the actors of the ANC deployed into the state are going to be very helpful in terms of the state's function and what the state needs to do to implement those recommendations. The ANC does not seriously take accountability for its role in the weakening of state institutions, the using and misusing and repurposing of those institutions for both political ends and for personal gain. And that is a very sad tale to tell of a liberation movement that prides itself on a history of having good leaders who put the country before themselves.
Yeah, that's why the report, if you read it at some point, it says government, parliament, and the governing ANC failed to take action to hold the state capture that weakened the country's democracy. Quite heavy findings on their part, and you've got those individuals implicated still pretty much in the leadership of the country at key institutions in the country. To the point that Ntsikelelo Breakfast is raising, apart from the institutions being able to hold them legally accountable, is the party ready to hold those individuals politically accountable, and what would that accountability look like?
Thank you. Let us understand that there came a stage, I think there are two things that happened here. One, that is within the ANC that they understood, and the Secretary General at the time was Halima Montante. And this information, I'm sharing it based on the testimony by Advocate Nwako Ramatodi at the Zondo Commission. So when one of the people was suspected and accused of corruption was Jacob Zuma around 2005 and before going up to the Bulwane conference and so on. the Secretary General of the African National Congress set up 2 committees, including Judge Bellem Heath, Lindy West Sisulu, Advocate Mwako Ramatlhodi, Tony Yengene, and others, to actually extricate Jacob Zuma from those trials. And they did that successfully. They went further, closed down the Scorpions, went further, weakened the entire security cluster, removed chief prosecutors, and so on. So the idea that you can join the ANC and be physically absolutely protected from the consequences of your illegal criminal acts is well established in the ANC. And those are the seeds of state capture that were planted officially from Luthuli House, inside of Luthuli House. So that you need to be there. The second one to consider is that the ANC so far has not had a credible source of income other than what has emerged in the Zondo Commission, as to say some of the people were actually taking money from state tenders and channeling that money into the ANC. Now, if that is the case, how does the ANC official, how do the ANC, NEC, and Top 6 turn around and say they are going to discipline the very people who have been organizing funds for the ANC? And also culturally, I want to believe, people who are known to be cadres but who have no specific profession or specific work experience or anything have been becoming very rich by playing nebulous roles in state tenders. So the state tenders were a way, and a generally accepted way of becoming rich in the ANC. So that is the other matter, that everybody knows that so-and-so is rich today, but we don't know why he is rich, other than the fact that he's a cadre and he had access to state tenders. So from that perspective, we cannot say that it will be easy for the ANC to discipline its cadres when the very same people who are in the top structure are heavily implicated. Some have received security cameras into their houses from Bosasa and so on and so on. Let me stop there.
Is there hope, or even a glimmer of hope, to expect political accountability emerging from the recommendations of the Zondo Commission coming from the ruling African National Congress? What are your thoughts tonight? 072-110-5584. Tweet us at Newzroom405. Rebone is coming up next with her view on what actually could possibly be the implications should the party decide, indeed, to implement the recommendations as outlined in that report. Stay with us. We're back in a moment. You're live with us here on In Focus on Newzroom Afrika channel 405, and thanks for staying on in conversation tonight with Tessa Dooms, Rebone Tau, and Ntsikelelo Breakfast, as well as Sandile, Swane. And of course, your views tonight on 072-110-5584. You're tweeting us tonight at Newzroom 405. The first part of the report into state capture is out. Of course, there are 3 iterations of this, so we're expecting more of those, mentioned also by the president during his January 8 statement. Rebone, we had the president of the ANC. Okay, maybe we'll still hear the articulation of the president of the country during the State of the Nation address on this particular report, but the president of the ANC welcoming the report. What would be the implications on the party of the implementation of these recommendations, particularly considering that when you look at them, by and large, those who will need to be prosecuted and be dealt with as per the recommendations are closely linked to former President Jacob Zuma?
Good evening, Tau, and good evening to the viewers and the rest of the panel. I think one must start by saying, also let's not forget, there was a letter that was written by the president to members of the ANC, and he said one of the things that ANC remains accused number 1 when it comes to issues of corruption and so forth. And the report also comes in at a very interesting time as the ANC prepares to go to its national elective conference, which we all know that is to sit in December. So outside of everything, it will be very interesting to see that even those some who are close to the president, are they going to be implicated? Because we're still waiting for part 2 and part 3, you know, because we know some sitting ministers and deputy ministers had to go and appear at the Zondo Commission, who today are close to the CR17 camp. So it is going to be a very difficult era for the ANC, as they build up for this conference, because some might also use this, and as Gwede Mantashe was saying yesterday, that some might use this just a report to de-campaign others, because you find that people have not yet been charged, and some might be mischievous, as Gwede Mantashe was saying, to say people will go around probably using the report saying don't vote for so and so because they're implicated. So there are those things that some people are fearing, and I think why Gwede Mantashe was saying this, because himself also, we know that through the Busasa, as it has been alleged that the security upgrade that were done in his house in the Eastern Cape. So we don't know what would the commission say also around him, and that also might also compromise his prospects, going to the national conference. So this report is going to also it's going to be at the center of the ANC national conference, which is due to sit in December. Thank you.
So, I mean, you see this as a possible political football on this build up to this rather important year of the elective conference. Already we are hearing murmurs of there is selective prosecution of certain individuals emerging, even with just this first part of the report being released. And therefore, are we looking to see a situation where nothing will happen because the party would want to take collective responsibility, or as Tessa is saying, we are going to see a situation where the party would want to distance itself from certain individuals?
Unfortunately, as we all know, that Sodi, who was also the commission, immediately after he appeared, he was arrested. That's why the Secretary General is also in court at this present moment here to step aside. That Rule 2570 will have to be kicked in for those, especially if they are leading in the National Executive Committee, to step aside, and yes, even if they are members of the ANC, they might not be leading in any structures, but they will have to step aside and not take part in this process of the elective conference. But once someone is charged, the constitution is clear. They've done it with Isma Khashule. They will have to do it with others once they're charged.
That breakfast. If you listen to the president of the ANC addressing the January 8th statement, he speaks of revolutionary discipline. I'm not quite sure what it is. Maybe you would know what he means by that. And does he strike you as a president who is ready and willing to put those members of the party through that degree of discipline?
Thabo, discipline and political education are like two ninja kids. There is a symbiotic relationship between the two. There is no way party members can abide by the discipline of the party without political education. That is practically impossible. It's a mission impossible. So what has happened since 1994 is that people who have joined the ANC, most of them did not make time to learn about what the party stands for. No wonder there has been a decline of intellectual and political debates. What we have seen is that people align themselves to certain factions in order for them to have access to resources within the state machinery. So I'm saying that the way out of ill discipline is political education. The ANC has failed to roll out political education to all and sundry within itself.
And therefore, any hope of saying we can use this report to, as it is, pick up what the mistakes are and rebuild the organization via this report, you're saying that is not even something that is possible?
Thabo, my view is that the theoretical foundation of the concept state capture has always been challenged. We must bear in mind that there are two definitions of state capture, but the media is running with one, which is the liberal definition that state capture refers to a shadow state whereby there is a family that was influencing government appointments and the awarding of lucrative tenders. That's the liberal definition. Paradoxically, you have a Marxist definition that state refers to an expression of class antagonism, or the state is an instrument of oppression, or the state represents certain class interests. Meaning that if you want to examine state capture, you have to look at the historical development of the state, meaning that you must go back to 1912. But when you look at the terms of reference of the State Capture Commission, they were confined to the epoch of Msholozi, which is a problem. I'm not saying that Msholozi must be exempted. I'm just saying that it does give the impression that he was a target. And that is going to make it very difficult for some people to accept those findings. Because I can argue that even at the moment, we still have state capture. For instance, the PPE scandals, they are an expression of state capture. Why? We've seen people using social capital, political capital in pursuit of personal accumulation in order to amass wealth, in order to have upward social mobility. Even before Msholozi, there was state capture. So the state is inherently captured.
Tessa, I mean, the argument has already been raised. For example, on the findings of South African Airways, there are those who are saying the Commission's work was quite narrow, and already it targets particular individuals and does not go back far enough to get those individuals who benefited millions and millions out of South African Airways and bring them to account. Is that going to be one of those hurdles or stumbling blocks from the implementation of the recommendations of this report?
Well, I think in fairness, when you think about the limitations of what a commission can do, is that a commission is given terms of reference. I remember one of the first things that was argued at the commission, even before testimony started, was what the time frame should be that the commission should cover in terms of its pursuit of state capture. And I like Professor Breakfast's reminder that state capture isn't about one person and one family in one period. It is about a systemic use of the state for nefarious purposes. And I think that conversation was about pointing out that we do need to have this kind of conversation about all eras of our democracy, including the current era. And if the ANC was serious about this, it would acknowledge that there were limitations in terms of resources, time, effort and energy and mandate that the Commission had in terms of what it could investigate. But that as the governing party, it will take lessons from this and look into other things and pay attention to the ways in which the state may still right now be used for nefarious purposes. There's an ongoing conversation right now within the ANC because of the financial crisis that it has about the relationship between the state and the party and the ways in which the state or the party relies on the state for some of its funding channels. The ANC needs to have that conversation in the present. That's not a conversation about the 9 wasted years. That's a conversation about today, about a law that was put in place that is demonstrating that the ANC cannot fund sufficiently outside of these networks and the ways in which it's using state tenders, relationships, social networks in order to benefit itself as a party. The ANC has a brilliant opportunity here to go far beyond what the recommendations, particularly the political recommendations of this report are, because I think that the legal recommendations are quite far-ranging. But I think there are still gaps in the governance and political recommendations of this report that the ANC could step up and fill in and make certain pronouncements about the way in which it's going to look at deployment, the way in which it's going to manage money that can be used from tenders and companies that are related to political parties and the ANC itself. It has an opportunity to lead in that regard, and whether it takes up that opportunity is going to be the difference between whether it can capture and recapture the trust of South Africans, or whether South Africans realize that the ANC don't have the will to actually correct this and become a party that steps up and is not corrupt.
And particularly on that particular point, I mean, do you think this is an opportunity to assess and reassess and reevaluate a policy like that of cadre deployment, which we saw even the president going to the commission to try and defend this thing by all means possible?
I mean, I think part 2 or part 3 at some point is going to have to deal with that conversation about deployment, because we've seen it not only in terms of political appointments, in terms of ministers and DGs, but of course the big ones around the SOEs and the ways in which those appointments have had an impact on corruption and the facilitation of corruption. The big part of the story is actually what the Commission's report refers to as the enablers. The people who were not quite the political actors that had the levers of power in their hands, and not quite the benefactors and the companies or individuals getting the money, but the people who were deployed by the party and were in the state and were able to then use the state to facilitate on behalf of the political and the company actors in this. And they, as the ANC, have had a big role to play in who those people are, in whether those people are competent, in whether those people are held accountable. The ANC's made decisions about, for instance, the state and as shareholders in the SOEs, having a role to play in appointing board members, in appointing the chairpersons. It has to take responsibility for that, and it has to make recommendations that it holds itself to around how it changes that situation around. And again, I don't know whether the ANC has the wherewithal to step up and take that challenge.
We're back in a moment here on In Focus, and to weigh in a little bit further on that, there's a financial implication, there is an organizational implication with the elected conference underway. What does that all mean for President Cyril Ramaphosa and his administration, and him literally putting his head on the block to an extent to say, well, if he's implicated as well, he's willing to fall on his sword, so to speak, in not so many words. We'll get back to that in a moment. Stay with us. Let us in on your views. 072-110-5584 or tweet us at Newzroom405. Welcome back in conversation tonight with Tessa Dooms, Rebone Tau, Ntsikelelo Breakfast, as well as Sandile, Swane, and of course taking your views tonight. 072-110-5584 or tweet us at Newzroom405. Before the break, we were speaking, Dr. Swane, very importantly about the implications of this, for example, on a policy like cadre deployment or cadre deployment. The report saying on that one of the defining features that has emerged in the evidence before the Commission is that in order to divert public funds for private benefit, it was necessary to populate key institutions with people who are going to comply with orders. Well, private benefit also means party benefit. Is the ANC in one angle willing to forego that particular benefit, for example, by dealing decisively with those individuals who are deployed? But on the other hand, is President Cyril Ramaphosa willing to, for example, risk the possibility of dividing the party because of the actions that he would want to take as per the recommendations on certain individuals?
Yes. The difficulty that the leadership of the ANC in its entirety is faced with is that a lot of cadres were deployed or planted in the state machinery to facilitate the extraction of cash from the state into, number one, the ANC, number two, the personal estates of the many cadres. So the upkeep of the cadres themselves and their luxurious lifestyles was maintained by the deployment. So the deployment was that sort of thing. Now, this was authorized. They were deployed. Number one, it's clear that they were deployed, so they were sent there. Number two, it was a culture. It was a culture of the ANC up until now that this money is removed for the benefit of the ANC. And Mabuya Kulu is one of those who will tell you, upfront, Mike Mabuya Kulu will tell you that I took this money and I gave it to the ANC. Then there are others, such as those who got security upgrades, some got meats and all sorts of things. So those ones were also getting private benefit and enjoying their lives through the ANC. So this was well known. So as the leader of the organization, if those things are not approved, you step in immediately and you stop them. But this was part of the day-to-day culture, and everybody was taking their fair share. I mean, the issue of Cyril's son, for instance, benefiting somehow from Bosasa is not completely morally resolved. He may have the techniques and skills of legally resolving it, but morally and from a governance point of view, it's not resolved. So to say I'm going to shambok this one, I'm going to cane that one for this, what was normal procedure, authorized work, is actually going to be very.
Yeah, I see. Prof. Ntsikelelo, you are agreeing with this particular view that it might not necessarily be a thing that the party is able to do, because it was a policy and a culture that was permitted and accepted within the party as a way of doing things.
Talking to me, Thabo?
Yes, yes.
Of course, Thabo. Though I do appreciate complexity, in my opinion, when talking about cadre deployment, because I do support cadre deployment only at a strategic level. Because even in the US, each and every administration is named after a particular president, like the Bush's administration, the Obama's administration. So at a strategic level, you have to deploy people who are aligned to the ideology of your party. There's nothing wrong about that. So long as those people have the qualifications and they're capable to get the job done. So that is not the issue for me. The problem is when you politicize middle management and what is happening at the operational level. The other problem has been that the state machinery has been used by the leaders of the ANC to dish out favors to their henchmen in exchange for support in order for them to hold on to power. In particular, when conferences of the ANC are about to be held. Even now, I can bet my bottom dollar in the build-up to the upcoming conference of the ANC that is going to happen.
Rebone, I mean, that in itself, I suppose, would be a make or break factor. Would it be for the Cyril administration? He's not indicating, but I suppose there is a sense that he's not achieved what he had come into this office to achieve, and so a second term is possibly something that he's already looking at, and there are some corners that have already come up in Limpopo to say Cyril for second term, and I think is it the Northern Cape? I saw another.
The Secretary of Northern Cape.
Yeah, who've come up and say the second term. We know that it's a party that financially right now is not doing very well. There are rumors that his ascent to power cost close to $1 billion. Where would that money come from unless he's going to fund it himself?
I think for the upcoming conference, for Cyril Ramaphosa, it is not going to be very difficult for him to serve the second term. And if you look at ANC historical conferences, it only becomes difficult for the first term, because this is his last term, by the way, in most cases, because the ANC might not have in its constitution the term in terms of limiting for its president. They just use the country's constitution, because in South Africa's constitution that you can only serve 2 terms as the president. So he will not be using as much money as he had used, as it has been alleged going to Nasrec for this time around. And if you check in the different provinces, the dynamics that are at play, it's not about for the position of the president in the main. It is about the other 5 positions, which is the deputy president, the SG, the DSG, the national chair, and the TG. And as things stand, the RT faction is at its weakest. We're still to see who will be the presidential candidate for the RT, as things are not looking good for Ace Magashule. We know that he had tried his luck to go to Vembe to to have a program there in one of the branches, and immediately the region had to tell that branch to disengage from that program. But interesting enough, today we saw Ismail Khashule attending the funeral of the late mayor in Mpumalanga, and he was walking along the acting secretary Lindiwe, and he went to greet the masses. So it will be very interesting. But the RT is at its weakest at this present moment. They don't have a candidate. For Cyril, it's going to be a walk in the park. It has always been that the sitting president of the ANC does not find it difficult to serve a second term. We saw even with Jacob Zuma in 2012, he did not find it difficult for him to come in as the president of the ANC in Mangaung.
Yeah. The complications, though, if you read, for example, things that are going on in the country, things like the burning of parliament and other government buildings, things like... well, others are saying it was sabotage, the switching off of lights during his statement, and things like that are playing out, right? Is this a president who is willing to put up with that kind of disruption on this build-up to the elective conference, which most of it will also emerge out of what is being said in this report and who should be dealt with legally or otherwise within this report?
I mean, those who are in politics will tell you that in the battlefield or in the war, there are no rules. So this is expected, from those who feel that they will be purged and sidelined and so forth. You can go back to even what Joel Netchenza said in 2017, that beneficiaries of state capture will not go down without a fight. But the question here, does even the state have that capacity, to make sure that what we saw in July does not happen? The way we've started the year this year, it's a bit worried, and especially because the president took SSA and took it to his office, as we know that it's only now the deputy minister. And the question that when these things are happening, where is the intelligence? It shows that over the past few months, the intelligence remains weak in this country.
That is, of course, the conversation tonight. And getting your views as well on the 072-110-5584, tweeting us at Newzroom405. And we ask the question, does the ANC have the political will and, I suppose, to hold those who are implicated politically accountable? And then when we come back, we'll talk a little bit more about government's technical capability, let alone the institutions that are required to be able to carry out further these investigations, as some of them were not particularly conclusive in the evidence that was given at the Commission of Inquiry. Do stay with us. In Focus continues in a moment. Live on In Focus, here on Newzroom Afrika, Channel 405, Tessa Dooms, Rebone Tau, Ntsikelelo breakfast, as well as Sandile, Swane with us, and you tonight on 072-110-5584, or otherwise on Twitter at Newzroom405. Does government have the technical capability to be able to implement the recommendations of the state capture report? But we've also touched broadly on the political will of the African National Congress to implement the many recommendations that are emerging from that state capture report. That is why, if you look at just the state of state security in the country, if you look at the latest developments at the NPA with the resignation of one of those who was leading particularly the prosecution of these rather complicated corruption crimes, does the state have the technical capability to carry out this work?
Yeah, the state, as things stand today, does not immediately have the capability to fully implement the recommendations of the Zondo Commission. And some of these recommendations are not new. But for instance, I'm told that in December, the head of the NPA said that this NPA is not properly funded. And Hemion Krunier also, I am told, resigned because her unit, which is what you and I would call the Scorpions, the new Scorpions, was not properly funded. So when you talk about the new dawn, you talk about renewal, you talk about those things. From 2018, Cyril Ramaphosa should have increased the funding to the NPA, to the new Scorpions, and make sure that it's not him who decides whether they are adequately funded. It is the professionals themselves who agree that we are now well-resourced and we're short of nothing to actually prosecute. As we know today, the NPA will have to select cases from the Zondo Commission. It cannot process all those cases. Secondly, as things stand today, the Auditor General does not have the capacity to audit state-owned companies. That is generally outsourced, let's put it like that. And Zondo says these things must be insourced. So, which means the Auditor General must build a proper and full, comprehensive, independent audit capability. That is going to need money at a time when Minister of Finance after Minister of Finance has been promoting austerity and the cutting of budgets, which in this case indicates the weakening of the state rather than the strengthening of the state to be able to fight corruption and improve administration. Lastly, the security cluster was deliberately and systematically weakened. We all know this. This is common cause. So it needs to be rebuilt in a number of ways. One of those ways is that the elements that have been conducting criminal activities within the security cluster do need to be identified and removed from there, and independent professionals introduced to make sure that the police, the intelligence agencies and the military are not delaying action when they are supposed to take action to protect the nation, or are actually aiding and abetting crime in South Africa against the state and crimes against the nation as a whole. So the capability of the state, and lastly, sorry, I forgot this one. For the past close to 8 years now, the Office of the Chief Procurement Officer has been ready to curtail the abuse of the procurement processes in the country. But the comrades, one way or the other, managed to kick Kenneth Brown out, who was leading that project, and they have never been able. I have not yet heard the report that this past 2021, they eventually appointed a full-time Chief Procurement Officer of South Africa with full research. The research is there, everything is there, what needs to be corrected. So those things are stalled deliberately, but there's potential of what needs to be done, but they need to put the money into it.
Yeah. Tessa, there are those already suggesting that, for example, similar to the apartheid crime prosecutions, we're going to sit with a report that for many years would have been there recommending prosecution, but nothing will actually happen. So many comparing this particular report to the TRC report.
Yeah, I mean, that is a concern. I mean, I think the first thing I said after reading a substantive part of the report, I don't think I'd gotten through volume 1 of part 1 by the time I realized that the NPA is going to have a backlog on their hands if they try to prosecute everything here, if they try to investigate everything here. And besides the points that have been made about the resourcing and the money that's not necessarily available for this at this point, there are serious questions to be asked about the competence of the prosecuting authorities and our investigative units to actually do this work. I think one of the most damning things about the Zondo report all the way through is really recommendations that go as far as suggesting that you need to take out some of these functions from the state. You need to, whether it's the investigative work and prosecutions in the form of, for instance, the anti-corruption unit that the Zondo Commission says should be set up. But also on the other hand, you know, thinking about the procurement processes, Zondo makes some recommendations around the private sector involvement, civil society involvement in procurement, and it suggests that we cannot actually trust the politicians that we have in place right now to do the right thing. That if we leave it as it is, that the politicians and the political parties and the political world is not capable and should not be trusted with the state. And that really raises important questions about, if not being able to handle the state and be trusted with the state, what is the point of the politicians we have? What is the point of the political parties that we have? Why are we going to go and vote if the people that we are voting for cannot be trusted with the state? We have a political crisis in this country, a crisis of political culture, a crisis of people in this country in mass, in their millions, that are withdrawing themselves from party politics, electoral politics, and all sorts of things, because we've gotten to a point where we do not trust not just one politician, one party, but the entirety of the political system and the players and the actors in it. And I think this report, again, is a moment for us to reflect and ask, what is the role of political parties and politicians if they cannot be entrusted with the state? If we're going to have to outsource so many of the state's functions to non-political actors, or insource so many non-political people into the state, it actually then makes our politicians redundant unless they are good, capable, trustworthy leaders.
Yeah. Dr. Breakfast, should pressure be applied on the Hawks to investigate and the NPA to prosecute, or should that particular task be left to private prosecution organizations?
First of all, I want to echo the sentiments by Mr. Swane. He made a very good point earlier on about the issue of fiscal discipline or reduction of government expenditure, because that has had a negative impact on the security operations, in particular with regard to the recruitment of men and women in uniform and men and women out of uniform. So government needs to re-examine its position with regard to the issue of budget. So I think there is a need to beef up the security apparatus. They need to be made professional. I get the sense that the war that has broken out within the ANC with regard to factionalism has permeated into the state machinery. I think it is unprofessional for men and women in uniform and out of uniform, even other people who are officials, to be taking sides in terms of the factional battles of the ANC. They need to be professional. When you are working for the state, you must be loyal to the government that is in power. Full stop. If you have other issues, you can be active outside the state, but you need to abide by orders so long as you are an officer within the state machinery. So maybe issues of discipline also, they need to take place in terms of dealing with the people who are refusing to abide by orders, to avoid what had happened also with regard to the outbreak of violence last year in July.
Yeah. Rebone, is the outcome of this commission that has cost the taxpayer over R1 billion going to be the final nail on the coffin of the ANC? Will we see more divisions coming out of the party because of the recommendations of this particular report? Please unmute for us.
Thanks. So I think for me it's more about the consistency that must be there within the party. People must not, some be protected because they're in a particular faction. As long as your name appears in the report, everyone must be dealt with accordingly. And that will help to say that not a certain group is being purged and another group is being left. So the ANC needs to, and then this is where the integrity committee comes in. Because you must remember that the ANC has got a committee, the integrity committee, and will the integrity committee also use this report in terms of sanctioning some of those that have been mentioned, and I think the other thing is that yes, the integrity committee makes recommendations to the National Executive Committee, and you find that most cases, these people who must then process you are also members. You serve with them in the same structure. But I think the ANC is serious about cleaning up things. They should not take any side from any faction. As long as you've been implicated or you are charged, everyone must be treated equally and not be left alone because of certain individuals are probably closer to the sitting president of the ANC. And that's why the problem with the ANC has always been that people will always, certain individuals position themselves to be close to the president and can get away with anything that they do during that administration.
Appreciate you all, and thank you very much for joining us. Sandile, Swane, Dr. Ntsikelelo, Breakfast, Rebone Tau, as well as Tessa Dooms. And, of course, thanks to you as well and your engagement. We'll take this.